The city sprawled endlessly, its skyline crowned by glass towers that glittered like diamonds under the harsh sun. From a distance, the metropolis looked like a place where dreams were born, and success was promised to anyone willing to chase it. The streets hummed with the sounds of ambition, the constant rush of people weaving in and out of shops, restaurants, and office buildings. It was a city where wealth and prosperity stood on every corner, where the lights never dimmed, and the night felt just as alive as the day. But beneath the glossy surface of the city, beyond the polished floors, the glass facades, and the sparkling chandeliers that lit up the night sky, there existed a darker reality. For some, this city wasn't a place of dreams, it was a place of endless struggle. For 12-year-old Mia and her mother, Lisa, the city was a cold, unyielding maze of cruelty, indifference, and despair. Every day, they faced the harsh truth of survival, a truth that the gleaming towers above them seemed to ignore, as though they were too far removed from the struggles of the streets. Mia's life had never been easy. She was born into poverty. Her father, Mark, disappearing when she was too young to remember him. Her mother had always said it was for the best, but Mia knew better. Her mother's eyes told a different story, one of heartbreak and loss, of a promise broken and debts left unpaid. Lisa struggled to hold everything together, working long hours in a rundown diner, scraping together just enough money to buy the next meal. The air in their small home, if you could call it that, was always thick with the smell of mildew, the walls barely standing up against the elements. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the floors creaked with every step, as though the house was as tired as they were. The single mattress they shared had seen better days, and the scent of dampness never seemed to leave their skin. Mia could never forget the days when she would go without food, pretending she wasn't hungry to spare her mother from the guilt. She would smile and say she was fine, even as her stomach twisted in hunger, the ache gnawing at her from the inside out. Lisa, for all her strength, couldn't hide the weariness in her eyes. The shame of not being able to provide for her daughter was written in every wrinkle of her face, in every sigh she let out after a long shift at the diner. Mia, however, never complained. She knew that their survival was a shared burden. And still, Mia clung to her mother's words. One day, you'll have a better life, a real home, a real future. But that dream felt so far away. The world was not kind to Mia. Her ragged clothes and dark skin made her an easy target for ridicule. She was often sent away with a harsh word or an empty stare when she asked for help in the wealthier neighborhoods. People would slam doors in her face, yell insults at her, or turn away as though she didn't exist. Yet, there were those rare moments, like a kind stranger handing her a sandwich, or a passerby slipping a few coins into her hand without saying a word, that kept her going. Those moments, fleeting and few, were enough to remind her that kindness still existed in the world. But, for the most part, Mia and her mother were invisible. Their landlord, Mr. Pritchard, was a cruel man who seemed to take pleasure in reminding Lisa of her debt. "Your rent is late again," he would say, his voice dripping with disdain, standing in the doorway as if to remind them of how little they mattered. "Pay up or get out." Lisa's voice would break as she pleaded, but it was never enough. Each month was a battle they couldn't win, each day a struggle to survive. And yet, Lisa kept going. For Mia, for the dream of a better life. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, they began to lose hope. They had no place left to go, no one left to turn to. Their life had been reduced to the constant struggle of surviving another day. One evening, after hours of wandering the streets, the pair found themselves lost in the maze of the city. The streets were unforgiving, the sun beating down mercilessly as they trudged through the oppressive heat. Mia's feet were blistered, and Lisa's legs trembled from exhaustion. Just as they were about to give up, they stumbled upon something unexpected, an abandoned car. It was old, rusted, and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But to Mia and Lisa, it was a lifeline. They crawled inside, escaping the heat and the dangers of the streets. The car, for all its rust and neglect, became their sanctuary. That night, as Mia lay curled up beside her mother, trying to sleep despite the cold, she couldn't help but wonder who had once owned this car. Had they been happy? Had they had a family, a life, a future that was now gone? The thoughts passed quickly, drowned out by the need to survive. Tomorrow, they would face another day of uncertainty. But for now, this old car was a fragile comfort. It was in this moment of stillness, in the quiet, that Mia's mind wandered to the things she wished for. She dreamed of a house with a garden, a swing in the backyard, a place to call home where she could be safe and warm. She dreamed of a life beyond the one she was trapped in, a future where she wasn't just a little girl begging for scraps on the streets. And even though she didn't believe those dreams could come true, Mia clung to them. They were the only thing that kept her from falling into despair. But that night, fate would take a different turn. As the storm raged on outside, Mia and Lisa heard a sound that broke the silence, a scream for help. Mia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a cry for help, desperate and full of fear. Without thinking, she climbed out of the car, the rain soaking her through. Her mother called after her, but Mia didn't listen. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a deep, unshakable need to do something. The screams grew louder as Mia made her way down the street. Lightning flashed, revealing the wreckage ahead. A car crashed into a tree, smoke rising from the engine. The scene was chaotic, the air thick with the smell of burning rubber and gasoline. But in the wreckage, Mia saw something that made her heart stop, a baby, crying helplessly, alone. Without a second thought, Mia dashed forward, ignoring the danger, the broken glass, the twisted metal, and the smoke. She crawled into the back of the car, her hands trembling as she reached for the crying baby, trying to comfort it as best as she could. The baby's small fists flailed, tears streaming down its cheeks, and Mia whispered softly, "It's okay. I'm here. I'll get you out." The woman who had been standing nearby in shock finally moved, rushing to Mia and the baby. Her eyes were filled with relief as she took her child in her arms. "You saved her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved my baby." Mia's days blurred into one another, each indistinguishable from the last. The harshness of their lives was like a shadow, following them everywhere they went, pressing down on their shoulders and filling every waking moment with worry. The fight for survival had become their daily routine, a constant battle against the odds, and it was one they had long since stopped questioning. For Mia, the city had ceased to be a place of promise or opportunity. It was a place where the weak were crushed, where those without money or power were forgotten, and where hope was a luxury few could afford. Lisa, her mother, had never stopped trying to make things work, despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on her, despite the crushing sense of helplessness that often overtook her. She never allowed Mia to see her defeat. She told her daughter every day that things would get better, that they just needed to hold on a little longer. But Mia saw the cracks in her mother's smile, the weariness in her eyes, and she knew the truth. Her mother was only pretending to be strong. The weight of their circumstances was too much for one person to carry. Lisa worked at the diner from dawn until late at night. Her shifts were long, often stretching into the early hours of the morning, and the work was grueling. She wore a permanent frown, the lines on her face deepening every day as she served greasy plates of food to customers who barely noticed her presence. There were days when she felt as though her efforts went unnoticed, as though no one cared about the sacrifices she was making. The tips she earned were never enough to cover the rent, let alone the cost of food and necessities. The relentless cycle of working, earning just enough to get by, and then starting over again the next day had drained her spirit. But she had no choice. Mia depended on her. Despite the long hours, Lisa always tried to make time for Mia. She would come home, tired and worn, only to find her daughter waiting eagerly for her, ready to help with the chores or just to talk. Mia's presence brought a flicker of light into Lisa's dim world, a reminder of what she was fighting for. But there were times, too many times, when Mia saw the look of defeat in her mother's face. The world was pushing them down, and Lisa didn't know how much longer she could hold them both up. In the evenings, when Mia wasn't at school, she wandered the streets of the city, looking for something, anything, to help her mother. Sometimes, she would stand outside the local grocery store, watching the shoppers come and go, hoping for a few extra coins. But even that was a difficult task. People often turned away, too busy or too indifferent to acknowledge the girl standing on the sidewalk, her hands outstretched. The few times someone did stop and offer her change, it felt like a victory, even though she knew it was never enough. The people who had more than enough didn't see them, didn't see her. Mia's clothes were worn thin, her shoes too small, her hair unkempt. She had stopped caring about what she looked like a long time ago. No matter how hard she tried to make herself presentable, it was never enough. The other children at school made sure to remind her of that. They teased her relentlessly, calling her names, laughing at her ragged appearance, her dark skin, the stains on her clothes. The taunts stung, but Mia had learned to ignore them. She had learned to block out the noise, to pretend it didn't hurt, even when it did. At night, when the moon hung low in the sky and the streets were quiet, Mia would lie awake in the small apartment they called home, listening to the sounds of the city, the hum of the traffic outside, the distant voices of people walking by, the occasional sirens. It was always loud, but it was never comforting. It was a constant reminder that the world outside was moving, changing, while she and her mother were stuck in the same place. There were times when Mia would close her eyes and dream of a different life, a life where they weren't always struggling, where they didn't have to fear the landlord's threats or the empty cupboards. But those dreams felt so distant, so far removed from the reality of her life, that they almost seemed like a cruel joke. The apartment they lived in was a small, cramped space on the second floor of an old building. The walls were thin, and the ceiling was low, making the place feel suffocating. The floors creaked under every step, and the air always smelled faintly of mildew. There was a single window, but it was too high up to offer any real view of the outside world. All Mia could see was the brick wall of the neighboring building, closing them in, making them feel even more isolated. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the walls were stained with watermarks. They did their best to patch up the holes, but the repairs never lasted long. The money they had was never enough to fix everything, so they made do with what they had. Every time it rained, Mia would scramble to place buckets and pots under the leaks, hoping to catch enough water to keep the floor dry. It was exhausting, but it was just another part of their life. Mia had learned to accept the imperfections, the inconveniences, and the frustrations. After all, what choice did they have? Sometimes, when the nights were particularly cold, Mia would curl up beside her mother on the thin mattress they shared. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. The warmth of her mother's body against hers was the only comfort Mia could find. But even then, as she lay there, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep going, how much longer they could endure the weight of the world bearing down on them. The city, with all its promise and opportunity, seemed so far out of reach, like a place they could never enter. Mia's dreams of a better life had begun to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of what they faced every day. But even in the face of overwhelming hardship, Mia refused to give up. She wasn't going to let the world crush her spirit. She wasn't going to let the cruelty of the city defeat her. She had her mother, and that was enough. For now, at least. And so, she endured. One rainy evening, as the city seemed to drown in a relentless downpour, the weight of Mia's life shifted. It was a moment that would change everything. Though Mia didn't know it at the time, it had started like any other day, with Lisa rushing out early to her shift at the diner and Mia left to fend for herself in their small, run-down apartment. She had gotten used to this routine, getting ready for school, managing what little breakfast they had, and then setting off for the day while trying to find time to help her mother later. But on that particular day, things didn't go as planned. As Mia left the apartment and stepped into the street, the storm was already in full force. Rain fell in sheets, and the wind whipped through the alleyways, pushing people to seek shelter wherever they could. Mia didn't mind the rain. It was a familiar companion to her, just like the cold air and the crowded, noisy streets of the city. She pulled her jacket tightly around her small frame and began walking toward the bus stop, careful to avoid the deep puddles that had formed on the cracked sidewalks. It was then that she noticed something unusual, a man standing near the corner, under the dim light of a street lamp. He wasn't someone she recognized, and in a neighborhood where strangers were often viewed with suspicion, It was odd to see someone lingering on a street she frequented. His presence seemed out of place. But Mia paid little attention to him at first. She had learned long ago not to get involved with anyone who didn't matter. But then, as she waited at the bus stop, the man approached her. Mia stiffened, ready to cross the street if needed. She had heard stories about people who took advantage of the vulnerable, and she wasn't about to become a victim. But the man didn't seem threatening. His face was tired, and his eyes held a strange sadness. He didn't look like a typical predator. "Mia?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible over the rain. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? "Who are you?" she asked cautiously. Stepping back, she studied him, searching for any signs of danger. The man hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'm sorry to scare you. I know this is strange, but I'm your uncle." His voice cracked as he said the word, and Mia's confusion deepened. She didn't have an uncle, or at least, she didn't know anyone who could be her uncle. "Uncle?" she repeated, a hint of disbelief creeping into her voice. "I don't have an uncle. I don't know you." The man's eyes shifted nervously, as if he were unsure of how to proceed. He looked around the street as though he were trying to gauge whether anyone was watching before he continued. "I understand this is confusing, but I promise you I'm not lying. I've been trying to find you for a long time. I'm your father's brother. Your father left when you were very young, but I've always known about you." Mia's heart pounded in her chest. The word struck her like a lightning bolt. Her father? She had no memory of him. He had left when she was just a baby, and all she knew about him came from the few fragmented stories her mother had shared with her over the years, most of them filled with bitterness, loss, and resentment. She didn't know if she could believe this man standing in front of her, but something in his voice, in his tired eyes, made her hesitate. "Why didn't you come before?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly as she fought to make sense of the situation. "Why now?" The man sighed, clearly weary. "I know I should have come sooner, but life got in the way. Mistakes were made. I'm sorry for that, but I've finally tracked you down, and I want to help. Your mother, she's been struggling, hasn't she? I've seen it, and I want to make things right." Mia stood still, the rain drenching her clothes, her mind racing with questions. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but at the same time, something deep within her stirred, a feeling she couldn't ignore. Could this man really be her uncle? And if so, what did he want? What kind of help could he possibly offer? Before she could respond, he continued, his voice almost pleading. "I know you probably don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But listen, Mia, there's something I need you to know. Your life, it's about to change. There's an opportunity for you and your mother to get out of here, to escape this life of poverty and struggle. But you have to trust me." Mia's head spun. She had heard promises like this before. People who claimed they could offer a better life, a way out of the dark reality she and her mother lived in. Most of those promises had been empty, lies told by people who were only looking to exploit the vulnerable. She had no reason to believe this man, no reason to trust his words. But something about his desperation, his sincerity, touched her heart. "What do you want from us?" she asked cautiously. The man's face softened. "I don't want anything from you, Mia. I just want to make things right. I can offer you a safe place to stay, a chance to leave this city behind, and a future that's not filled with constant worry. But you have to come with me." Mia hesitated. The storm continued to pour down around them, the city buzzing with life, indifferent to the conversation taking place at its edges. She had spent so long fighting just to survive, just to make it through each day. And now, here was someone offering her an escape, a chance at something better. But could she trust him? "I'll take you to your mother," he said, reading her uncertainty. "I promise you, I'm not going anywhere without both of you. I'll explain everything, and you can decide what's best for you." Mia stood there, staring at the man, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to turn and walk away. But deep down, she felt a flicker of hope that she hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was the chance they needed. Maybe this was the key to unlocking a better future. Without another word, Mia made her decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, but it was the only one that felt like it might lead to something more than the suffocating life she had known. She nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long while, the heavy weight on her shoulders seemed just a little bit lighter. The rain had stopped, but the tension still clung to Mia as she followed the stranger, her supposed uncle, down the narrow alleyways that led to the heart of the city. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, each new revelation adding layers of confusion and hope in equal measure. With every step, she moved further from the life she knew, uncertain of what lay ahead. Yet there was a small, fragile thread of hope growing inside her, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Could this really be the turning point she had been desperately searching for? The man, whose name was Mark, led her through streets Mia had traversed countless times, though they now seemed unfamiliar, almost alien, as if they no longer belonged to her. She had always been used to navigating the worn paths of her existence, but now it felt like she was walking in someone else's shoes. She tried to push aside the growing discomfort, but it was hard to ignore. She was used to the small apartment with its peeling walls and creaky floors, to the constant struggle to make ends meet. The prospect of leaving all of that behind was both exhilarating and terrifying. They arrived at a small, inconspicuous building on the edge of the city, a stark contrast to the chaotic world outside its walls. It looked well-kept, serene, almost peaceful in comparison to the bustling, decaying streets. Mark led her inside, and Mia was immediately struck by the quiet warmth that enveloped her. It felt like stepping into another world. This was not the harsh, unforgiving environment she had grown up in. This place was different. It was safe. "This is where I've been living," Mark said, his voice softer now. "It's a quiet place. People here don't ask too many questions, but it's a good place to start over. Mia, you and your mother can stay here for as long as you need. There are no strings attached, just a chance to breathe, to think." Mia stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. Everything was happening so fast, too fast. Maybe. She had so many questions, but she didn't know where to start. And even though Mark seemed genuine, she still couldn't shake the nagging feeling of doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. Before she could speak, Mark gestured for her to follow him further into the building. As they walked down a narrow corridor, Mia noticed the soft, almost imperceptible hum of life within the space. There were families, quiet conversations, and laughter in the distance, things that had been so absent from Mia's life for as long as she could remember. It was a stark contrast to the constant tension and isolation she had known in the city. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what life could be like here. When they reached the end of the hallway, Mark stopped in front of a door and knocked twice before entering. "I thought you'd want to see it," he said with a slight smile. Inside was a small, but cozy apartment. It was furnished simply, but with a level of care that Mia had never experienced before. The space felt inviting, with soft lighting, a comfortable couch, and a small kitchen area tucked into one corner. There was a feeling of calm that pervaded the room, and for a moment, Mia felt as though she had stepped into a dream she hadn't allowed herself to imagine for so long. "This could be yours," Mark said, watching Mia's reaction carefully. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I wanted you to see that there's more out there than the life you've been living. You don't have to settle for the constant struggle. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Mia's heart ached at his words. She hadn't realized how much she had been living in fear of not being enough, fear of failure, fear of what might happen to her mother. For years, she had kept her head down and focused only on surviving. But now, for the first time, the possibility of something different, something better, was right in front of her. But it wasn't just the apartment that caught her attention. It was the promise of something more, something she hadn't dared to dream about. Mark wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He was offering her a chance to rebuild her life, to start over in a way that was never possible before. She could finally break free from the chains of poverty, from the constant worry about where the next meal would come from the suffocating weight of living in a world that never seemed to care about her. This was a chance to escape a future that had already been written for her, a future that seemed destined to repeat the struggles of the past. "What do you want from us?" Mia asked again, her voice quieter now. As she struggled to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. "Why are you doing this?" Mark smiled gently. "I want nothing more than to see you and your mother happy, safe, and free from the burdens that have been weighing you down. You've both been through so much. I just want to help give you the chance to build something new. You deserve it." Mia felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions rising to the surface. She had never been offered anything like this before, not from anyone, not from any source. She had been taught to distrust others, to rely only on herself and her mother. The world had always seemed like a place full of danger and disappointment. But now, for the first time, someone was offering her an opportunity to truly change her life. She stood in the center of the apartment, taking it all in. The soft hum of a new possibility filled the air. And for a moment, she allowed herself to picture a life beyond the cramped apartment she had known all her life. She imagined a future where she could focus on her studies, where she wouldn't have to worry every day about survival. She imagined a life where she could help her mother in ways she had never been able to before. "I don't know what to say," Mia said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is all so much. I don't know if I can just believe it." "You don't have to believe it all at once," Mark reassured her. "Take your time, but I promise you, Mia, this is real. You have the chance to build something better, not just for yourself, but for your mother too. I'm here to help you both every step of the way." Mia nodded, though her heart was still uncertain. There was so much she didn't understand, so much that was still unclear. But something deep inside her told her that this was the moment of change. This was the key to unlocking a future that was hers to shape. It would take time, effort, and trust. But for the first time, Mia felt a spark of hope, a hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her life could be different. And with that thought, she made a silent promise to herself. She would take the leap. She would give this chance everything she had, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. For the first time in years, Mia allowed herself to dream of a future where her struggles would no longer define her. Mia stood at the threshold of her new life, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made settle within her chest. Mark had shown her the path, but now, the journey was hers to walk alone. The apartment was hers now, a fresh start in a world that felt at once unfamiliar and full of potential. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a symbol of all the possibilities she had long abandoned as out of reach. For the first time in years, Mia felt the exhilarating spark of possibility. Yet, with it came the daunting reality that this fresh start came with its own set of challenges. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was hers to shape. The first few days in her new apartment were a whirlwind of emotions. Mia spent hours unpacking, organizing the small, cozy space as if trying to create a sense of permanence in a world that had always been in flux. She arranged the few belongings she had into the drawers and cabinets, trying to give each item a place in this new chapter of her life. Every corner of the apartment, though small, began to feel like a part of her, her sanctuary from the chaos of the world outside. Yet, there was still a sense of unfamiliarity, as if she were a visitor rather than a resident. The world she had left behind was still vivid in her mind, with its challenges and struggles, and every now and then, the memories crept in, whispering doubts into her thoughts. Was this truly real? Could she really leave all that behind and embrace this new life? But the answer was becoming clearer each day. Every time Mia sat down to eat a meal, she marveled at the simplicity of it, having food when she needed it, without the constant anxiety about how to get by. Every time she turned on the small, functional heater in her apartment, she was reminded that she didn't have to face the cold on the streets. Every moment of peace, no matter how small, reaffirmed her decision to take the leap and start anew. She didn't have to fight for survival anymore. Now, she could focus on building something else, a future. Mia knew that leaving behind the life she'd known wasn't just about changing her surroundings. It was about reshaping her entire mindset. No longer would she see the world as a place that only took from her. She had to learn to view it as a place of possibility, a place where she could have a say in her own destiny. But breaking away from years of hard-earned habits and survival strategies wasn't going to happen overnight. Each day was a conscious step toward reimagining who she could be and what she could accomplish. The weight of the past was not easy to shake off. Mia couldn't escape the guilt of leaving her mother behind in the life they had shared. Every night, when she lay in her bed, the thought of her mother crossed her mind. Was she okay? Was she as uncertain as Mia felt about the new changes? Mia had always taken care of her mother, and now she felt torn between two worlds, the one she had left behind and the one she was trying to build. Yet, even in these moments of doubt, she knew that the best way to help her mother was to help herself first. It wasn't enough to remain stuck in the same cycle. Mia had to break free and show her mother that there was more to life than just surviving. She had always been independent, determined to create a better future for herself and her family. And now that drive had a new focus, the decision to pursue a future of stability, to climb beyond the limitations she had once accepted, would be one of the most challenging things she'd ever done. But it was also the most necessary. Mia knew she couldn't do it alone. And though Mark had opened the door to this new journey, it was up to her to step through it. A few weeks into her new life, Mia enrolled in a local community college. It wasn't a prestigious institution, but it was a step in the direction she had long dreamed of, toward a better education and, by extension, a better future. The first day she stepped onto the campus, she couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. It was a foreign feeling, one that hadn't visited her for years. As she walked through the halls, mingling with students who seemed to have such confidence in their futures, she felt like an outsider. But she was no longer the scared, uncertain girl she had been when she arrived. She was someone different now, someone with purpose. The classes were tough. There was no sugarcoating the reality that Mia was far behind her peers. The world of academia was not a place she had known well, and she often found herself feeling overwhelmed by the concepts and terminology being thrown at her. But Mia was no stranger to hard work. The fear of failure had driven her for years, and now, that fear had become a source of motivation. Every challenge was just another hurdle to overcome. She spent hours studying, attending extra tutoring sessions, and making friends who helped her along the way. Slowly but surely, she began to catch up. As the weeks turned into months, Mia began to notice small changes within herself. She was no longer the girl who had walked into that apartment unsure of her place in the world. She was becoming someone new, someone who believed in her own potential. She began to set goals for herself, goals that once seemed impossible, but now felt within reach. There was the thought of earning her degree, of using it to secure a career that would allow her to help others the way Mark had helped her. There was the thought of one day being able to provide for her mother in a way that she had never been able to before. Mia's dreams were no longer abstract, they were concrete, and she was building them step by step. The most significant change, however, was the shift in her perception of the world around her. For so long, Mia had seen life through a lens of fear and survival, viewing each day as a battle to be won. Now, she saw the world as a place of opportunity. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments of doubt, but Mia knew that she was in control of her own story. Her journey was just beginning, and the possibilities felt endless. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and moments when she wanted to quit, but Mia had something now that she had never had before: hope. And with that hope, she could face whatever the future had in store for her. This new journey was not without its difficulties. There were days when Mia wanted to give up, when the weight of the world felt too heavy to carry. But she had learned one important truth during her time in the city: no matter how hard life got, she could always pick herself up and keep moving forward. The road ahead was long, but she was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The transition from the past to the future was never as smooth as Mia had hoped. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, wondering if she had made a mistake. The weight of the change felt overwhelming, and the self-doubt crept in with the silence of the night. Every small setback seemed like a mountain to climb, and the old voices from her past whispered, urging her to give up. It would have been easier to return to the comfort of what she knew, to return to the survival mode that had gotten her through so much of her life. But deep down, Mia knew she couldn't go back. Not anymore. Each day, Mia fought against the temptation to retreat. She knew she couldn't afford to. Not for herself, and certainly not for the life she wanted to create. The memory of her mother's face, the love in her eyes, and the unspoken hope she had for Mia kept her going. She couldn't let her mother's sacrifice be in vain. She couldn't let her past define her future. And as difficult as it was to break free from the habits of survival, Mia had to try. She had to carve out a life that meant something, not just for her, but for the people she loved. The first few months were the hardest. Mia's part-time job at the local cafe barely covered her rent, and the cost of textbooks for her college courses stretched her finances thin. She ate ramen noodles more often than she cared to admit, and some days, it felt like the end of the road was nowhere in sight. The pressure mounted, and Mia's exhaustion was palpable. There were days when her resolve faltered, when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. Was it worth all the sacrifices? Was the future she dreamed of even possible? But as time went on, something remarkable started to happen. Mia found small victories in the midst of her struggles. One day, after a particularly tough exam, she received an email from her professor, praising her effort despite the challenges. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ignite a flicker of hope in her heart. She was on the right track, even when it didn't feel that way. The acknowledgement of her hard work, no matter how small, gave her the motivation to keep pushing forward. It reminded her that success wasn't just about the end result. It was about the persistence, the resilience to keep going when everything else seemed impossible. Her job at the cafe, though draining, became a place where Mia could connect with people, something she hadn't anticipated. She made friends with her coworkers, people who had their own stories of struggle and perseverance. They shared their experiences, and in turn, Mia shared hers. It wasn't easy to open up, but in the shared vulnerability of their conversations, Mia found a sense of belonging she hadn't known she needed. She wasn't alone in this fight, and as she realized that, her sense of isolation began to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding that the road ahead, though difficult, wasn't one she had to walk alone. Despite the harsh realities of her new life, Mia found herself growing stronger, both emotionally and mentally. Every challenge she faced, every late-night study session, every financial setback, every difficult decision, was shaping her into someone who could face the world with more confidence. She was no longer the scared girl who had stepped into that apartment with nothing but a suitcase. She was becoming someone who understood the value of her own strength. She was learning that the key to change wasn't just about the destination, but about the courage to keep going, even when the path seemed unclear. Mia's determination began to pay off in ways she hadn't expected. Her grades improved steadily, and while she wasn't at the top of her class, the progress she made felt like a victory in itself. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future beyond the walls of the cafe. She dreamed of a career where she could make a difference, where her voice could be heard, and her story could inspire others. It wasn't just about escaping the past anymore. It was about building a new future, one decision at a time. And as she worked toward her degree, Mia began to see the world differently. No longer did she see it as a place full of obstacles and insurmountable challenges. She began to see it as a space for growth, for reinvention. Her perspective had shifted, and with it, her approach to life. She learned to celebrate the small wins, to savor the moments when things went right, no matter how fleeting. She learned to acknowledge the moments when she felt defeated, but to also recognize that these were not the end of her story. They were simply parts of the journey, just like the moments of triumph. Mia's journey wasn't without setbacks. There were times when she felt like she was walking in circles, not getting any closer to her goals. There were moments when she thought of giving up, of returning to the life she had known, even though she knew deep down that would mean going backward. But each time she felt that way, Mia reminded herself why she had chosen this path in the first place. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing this for her future, for her mother, for the life she had always dreamed of but never dared to imagine. Slowly but surely, Mia's foundation began to take shape. She found herself making decisions that were aligned with her goals, even if they weren't the easiest ones. She stopped wasting time on things that didn't matter, things that held her back from her true potential. She learned to prioritize her education, her health, and her emotional well-being. She understood that self-care wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, and in the process, she started to see changes not just in her life, but in herself. The woman who had once been consumed by fear and uncertainty was slowly being replaced by someone who was growing into her own power. The journey from struggle to hope wasn't linear, nor was it simple. There were days when Mia felt like giving up, when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. But as she kept putting one foot in front of the other, she discovered that hope wasn't something that arrived in a single moment. It wasn't a destination, it was a process. It was something that grew in the quiet spaces between the moments of struggle, something that built with every small act of courage, every choice to keep going despite the odds. Hope, Mia learned, wasn't just about waiting for the world to change. It was about changing herself, believing in herself enough to take the first step, even when the way ahead was unclear. As she moved forward, day by day, she knew that the future was hers to create. And though there would be more struggles, more challenges, more doubts, she was no longer afraid, because Mia had learned something invaluable. Even in the face of adversity, there was always room for hope to grow. And with that hope, anything was possible. Mia's journey from struggle to hope was not a simple tale of transformation. It was a story built on resilience, determination, and the unwavering belief that even the most challenging circumstances can lead to a brighter future. The road ahead for her was never going to be easy, but it had become clear that the only true failure was the choice to give up. By embracing her struggles and learning to see the opportunities hidden within them, Mia had taken the first crucial step in shaping a life she could be proud of. Her story serves as a reminder to us all. It's easy to look at someone's success and assume it was achieved effortlessly, but the truth is that every victory comes with its own set of challenges. For Mia, those challenges were many, from financial hardships to emotional exhaustion, from self-doubt to the constant pressure of balancing work and study. Yet, each obstacle she faced became a lesson, a piece of the puzzle that helped her become the person she was meant to be. The lesson is simple, even in the darkest times. There is always a glimmer of hope. Hope doesn't come from avoiding challenges or escaping pain. It comes from facing them head-on, knowing that they are not the end but a part of the larger journey. Mia had to learn this the hard way, but in doing so, she found the strength to build a new life, one that was meaningful, fulfilling, and full of promise. The struggles Mia faced were not unique to her. Every person who strives to change their life, to break free from the weight of their past, faces moments of doubt and despair. Whether it's overcoming financial instability, dealing with personal loss, or simply trying to find a place in the world, the path to success is never straight or easy. But it is through these struggles that we learn the most about ourselves. They reveal our capacity for resilience, our willingness to fight for a better future, and our ability to grow in ways we never imagined possible. As we look back at Mia's story, we must remember that change is always possible. No matter how impossible the future may seem, there is always a way forward if we're willing to embrace it. Change requires more than just wishful thinking. It requires action, persistence, and the courage to take risks. Mia didn't wait for her circumstances to change. She made the decision to take control of her own destiny. She made the decision to believe that her future was worth fighting for. And in doing so, she proved that we all have the power to rewrite our stories, regardless of where we start or the challenges we face. At the heart of Mia's journey is the realization that success is not just about achieving goals, but about finding meaning in the struggle. Every step she took, no matter how small, brought her closer to the life she had envisioned for herself. And that is the true measure of success, the ability to look back and see that, despite everything, we kept moving forward. That is what defines resilience, the willingness to persevere, even when the path ahead is unclear. As we reflect on Mia's journey, we are reminded of our own potential for change. It's easy to get caught up in the difficulties of the present and lose sight of the possibility of a brighter future. But like Mia, we all have the ability to overcome our challenges, to find hope in the darkest of times, and to create lives full of purpose and meaning. The key is to take that first step, even when we don't know where it will lead. The road ahead for Mia is still unfolding, but one thing is certain: she is no longer defined by her past. She has become the author of her own story, and with each chapter, she continues to grow stronger, wiser, and more determined to make the most of the life she's building. And as for the rest of us, We can take inspiration from her journey. We can all move forward with hope in our hearts, knowing that no matter what challenges we face, we too have the strength to turn our struggles into opportunities and our dreams into reality. Hope, like change, begins within us. It's not something we wait for, it's something we create. So, as we step into the future, let us carry with us the lesson that Mia learned along the way, that even in the face of adversity, there is always hope. And with hope, there is always the possibility of a better tomorrow.